Immediately, we'll open a public hearing on HB 764 FN, and I'll call Representative Kelly Potenza to introduce this legislation to us.
A question for the chair, if I could.
Yes, Representative Partial.
Thank you so much. We have numbers for the online testimony submissions on that last bill.
I'll ask Representative Ploge if he could get those.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Representative Potenza. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Representative Kelly Potenza, Stratford District 19. I'm here today to introduce HB 764. I hope you've all received the amendment. I put this amendment in, I don't know, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago after I saw the fiscal note that came back. So that it has literally, the bill has changed, so it has cut out that entire portion of the bill, which makes this definitely easier and more palatable to everyone. We had a bill that was introduced, I was a co-sponsor of, last session, and it was very extensive. This bill is pretty much quite simple. It does a couple different things. So currently, which you should have received this as well, Chapter 12F, which is current statute, has a weather modification experimentation statute. It's called 12F. So it repeals 12F, and it puts the most important part of 12F, which Representative Judy Aaron had done an amendment to in 2021, and it puts it into its own kind of part of this bill, where it actually prohibits geoengineering in case of course, there was severe drought, and then there would be, a declaration of a national emergency or a statewide emergency, and then, of course, the governor would have access to be able to do that if we were in that severe, and it gives all the steps, which are similar to kind of what's in this Chapter 12F about what would take place if we did fall into a severe drought and we needed to have cloud seeding efforts in New Hampshire. The other part of the bill is basically prohibiting geoengineering, weather modification, the terms SAI and SRM, which is solar radiation modification, and stratospheric aerosol injection, and that we're banning, in a sense, or prohibiting those in New Hampshire. Last year, I gave unbelievable amounts of follow-up testimony, a 12-page document that took me hundreds of hours going back. I only went actually back to 1965. I could have gone back to the 1930s, which talked about all different levels of administrations that have been involved in this, how it's been a global effort from the UN to, the weather enterprise and all of this. And so just so we could have some background on this whole topic. Folks in New Hampshire have not consented to this. And the piece of the bill here where it has a involvement of DES now would be, and I can show you the document that has about 35 different federal agencies that would be notified. And I have all of the background facts from all the different government websites. But these are all of the ones right now. It's online on the amendment page 2, line 30, all the way to line 37. And then on page 3, line 1 to line 17, that would be contacted if this bill is fortunate enough to make it to the end, and that they would be contacted that New Hampshire prohibits this type of weather modification. And that's pretty much the whole bill at this point. There really shouldn't be a fiscal note on it because of the amendment, and part of there was a concern about the cloud seeding piece, and that was the biggest concern that I received from fellow representatives, fellow co-sponsors of the bill. And so we took care of that specifically in all of the text here in regards if there was any sort of state emergency. And I'm open up for any questions.
Thank you, Representative, for introducing that legislation. Questions for Representative Potenza? Representative Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I'm looking on page 2 of the bill on line 29. Maybe I'm just missing something here, but it says, and the penalties for violating such prohibitions. Where do I find the penalties?
There's no penalties. Are you do you have the amendment?
I have the amendment, page 2, line 29, starts geoengineering is prohibited and the penalties for violating such prohibitions. And I'm trying to find where the penalties are in the bill.
I don't have.
Line 29, page 2.
Oh, page 2.
Yeah, right before it starts listing all the agencies.
That's just a mistake from OLS that it just needs to be wiped out of there. There are no penalties. So
All right, so that goes out.
that's they removed everything that was in front of that. So that's why.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That would be taken out. So basically, it should read, the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Services shall, within 30 days of the effective date of the section, provide notice to the following entities that geoengineering is prohibited in New Hampshire. Bam. And then it would go 30 to 37, and then on page 3, 1 to 17.
Okay, further questions? Well, seeing none, I guess I'll thank you for
Chair.
introducing this, Representative Ploget.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Potenza. Reading this over, it says the state, well, you already read it. Concerning these alleged chemicals, dispersions of materials, all you're asking or telling, I gotta put this in a question. What benefit would it have to us if it's being done now to allow these chemicals or any chemicals to be dispersed? What is a positive reason?
There's actually no positive reason, and if this committee would like, because of course there's new representatives on this committee, I'd be happy to submit the 12-page document that I had put together. I could cut out specifically those chemicals from, and I can read them off here, that cause a lot of problems, respiratory problems. So from aluminum to sulfur oxide, there's a whole slew of them that cause some problems. We have had some private citizens, and I've received, that have done this on their own, and where they have tested the rainwater in local labs for some of these entities that wouldn't be from acid rain. And so a gentleman in Salem and a gentleman up north. So, but those of course are anecdotal or whatever. But, and I should also say that Tennessee has passed similar legislation, and they did that last year, as well as Florida is very close right now to passing the same thing.
Okay, further questions? Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Potenza, for coming back with an improved bill. And it looks like you've, tried to work through all the issues. My question has to do with, there's a number of references to the Department of Environmental Services, and I see a representative from DES here today. Did you speak with DES about any of the conclusions that you've made here, or any of the activities that you will be asking them to undertake during the research for the bill?
I have, and he's here. He has the amended version of it. Their concern was, when it was in its previous version, was the tracking or the tracing and all of that. And of course, a big, huge line item monetarily as well. So that has all been removed. It's very easy for the department to send a certified letter to those government agencies, and that's all we're asking for at this point is a notice. A notice basically saying New Hampshire has passed this law.
Follow up?
Follow up.
I think he has to approve the follow-up, but thank you. So on page 2, section 3, line 15, it says the Department of Environmental Services shall maintain oversight of all cloud seeding activities to ensure compliance with regulations and to assess the effectiveness of cloud seeding operations. That sounds like more than just sending a letter. It sounds like they actually have to have.
No, that has to do with if there's an emergency and cloud seeding is necessary.
Okay.
That doesn't have anything to do. That has to do with basically taking 12F and
Yeah.
putting it into the declared state of emergency if there's a catastrophic drought. That has everything to do with that, which they would be part of if we needed to have cloud seeding. That doesn't have
Okay.
anything to do with the
So that
Prohibition.
Line, that line I'm referring to is section 3, and that you're saying that that's under a state of emergency piece?
Yes,
That's the section.
if you read
I'm
125C23, exception for cloud seeding weather modification in
On
case
line 1.
of catastrophic
yeah.
drought, you have 1, A, B, C, and D, 2, and then you have 3.
Okay. I'm with you.
Okay, cool.
Okay, additional questions. Vice Chair Thomas has one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. So just to be clear, as I'm reading through your amendment, it appears that because of what's on the first page of starting on line 30, that the amendment basically says there will be no geoengineering activities, weather modification, cloud seeding, aerosol injection, none whatsoever. Not that you're asking for permission or anything. It just says there'll be none. And the only exception would be if it's a catastrophic drought declared by the governor by way of several state agencies. Is that the intent of this amendment?
Yes.
Follow up?
Follow up.
And so this basically says that there's no notification. This is not saying first you have to notify us or first you have to get a permit or anything like that. It's a straight, there is no other option. The state would have no choice if this amendment was to pass like this, correct?
Correct, but no one ever consented to weather modification experimentation in Section 12F. And if that's something that the state wants to do, I mean, our Constitution, our New Hampshire Constitution, as well as our U.S. Constitution, is very clear that you need to have consent of the people before you're experimenting anything on them. And we never gave that kind of consent. So in regards with exemption for cloud seeding in a case of a catastrophic drought, as you can see, that would be in an extreme circumstance, and there is notification to all of, the entire state, all of the constituents, as well as then it's monitored, of course, from the Department of Environmental Services. You have to give consent before you decide you're doing any sort of experimentation on anyone.
Just want to be clear. Thanks.
Additional questions? Representative Harrington.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on this because as I read this now, and maybe I'm missing something, but it gives the prohibition there on the bottom of page 1 on line 30. No person shall engage in, so forth, and so on. So let's say I observe someone engaging in this, or I take some test and I see, oh, there's somebody depositing something out of the sky. I collect samples, find out it's somehow qualifies under this as being illegal. There apparently then is nothing I can do about it. I just say I've documented illegal working happenings, but there's no recourse. So I don't understand what it accomplishes.
Well, it actually accomplishes a lot. So first, we are repealing something that gave a state authority when they never had the authority because they never had consent of the people. So that's very important. And two, in the new administration, in the federal administration, there's been a lot of discussion about this. There's been a ton of media about it. We're most likely going to see an executive order about this coming down the pike. These are federal agencies, NGOs, that it's very hard to control. So the bill that I proposed, or that was proposed last session, tried to get a way we could track and people could, you know, whatever, put in complaints and all of that. And there just isn't a pathway. And there isn't a pathway for DES to do it because it'll cost $1 million. So this is step one. This is basically repealing something that we never consented to, saying that and it's exactly the same bill, just so you know, in Tennessee. There's no enforcement mechanism. It pretty much makes the statement that it's not allowed in our state. And so that's where we're basically putting the stake in the ground and we're saying that it's not allowed. And all of those agencies are going to get notified that are known to do weather modification, geoengineering, SAI, SRM. And it's step one. And because of what's going to be happening, I believe, within the next 2 months, on the federal side, I think it would be really good for New Hampshire to have this in place, to say we don't consent.
Representative Wendy Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for presenting this bill. I just am trying to figure out the timeline on page 2 here. So cloud seeding is allowed if the governor establishes a state of emergency. And then on line 12, it says prior to cloud seeding, you have to do this whole thorough environmental review. Doesn't that defeat declaring a state of emergency? So is it the state of emergency and then we go to a review, or are they doing a constant review prior to declaring a state of emergency? Thank you.
So I would have to say that this was done with the lawyer in OLS, and it was specific. So, for example, there's a catastrophic drought. It's not as if cloud seeding would happen within, 2 days from that. The governor is not a scientist, doesn't work for the Department of Environmental Services, is not a hydrogeologist or any of those things. So they would put forward an emergency saying that we need cloud seeding. And then, of course, the department would have to be able to provide the data. This basically is telling the people the state shall conduct a thorough environmental review, assessing potential risks and benefits, and ensuring that the activities will not result in harm to the environment, public health, or wildlife. That's part of it. So the state of emergency for a catastrophic drought and saying that the governor believes that cloud seeding is necessary, there still has to be steps that would take place. It's just like anything else. It's not as if, okay, take out the planes, it's going to happen tomorrow. So this is just, it's basically an approach that involves not only the entity of the stakeholders of the state, the Department of Environmental Services, but also the consent of the people.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Potenza, for bringing this bill. I just have a concern about the kind of the implicit notion behind this, that somehow the clouds in New Hampshire just stay right above us. What if this concept caught on and, say, the state of Vermont or the state of Maine declares an emergency drought and they want to seed their clouds, but the clouds are coming from the south or they're coming from the east? They would have to fly over the state of New Hampshire to seed their clouds. Or I mean, is that not a problem that you can foresee?
Maybe. I don't know. Most of the time when cloud seeding is happening, it's not necessarily so if you ever watched a video of the planes that are doing that, they're not like following clouds and doing it like that. It's basically over a certain geographical area. I can send you a wonderful video that was done in Colorado that shows that. So it's specific around an area. It's not as if they're following the clouds. Basically, when the chemicals or whatever is released, it creates a cloud cover. It actually, and then clouds form around that, injection into the atmosphere.
Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Potenza, for indulging me. I went and looked up Chapter F12, which is our current statute on weather modification experimentation, which I know you're quite familiar with. And I guess what my concern is the statute that we have on the books for weather modification experimentation already talks about the departments and the state and the governor and the executive council being involved in any discussions around how to pay for or to undertake any type of weather modification that might require cooperation with the federal government, which is what we see in other states that we know have had cloud seeding programs, say to get rain for droughts, like out in California and that kind of thing. So Section 1 talks about that piece of sort of like who's involved. And these are all elected people, so it's not like people don't have any say because these are representatives. We have a representative government. But Section 2 says that 2 months prior to the presentation to the governor, executive council for engagement in experimental techniques, the department or agency of state participating in such engagement or experimentation shall do the following. And then they have public notice in at least 4 papers, which is similar to language that you have in your bill. So they're required to not only notify the public, they're also required to disclose to the public the chemical compounds and technologies that will be used in the proposed weather modification in the state and the effects of the programs or experimentations on human health, wildlife habitats that may be affected, and the sources of funding to perform such programs. So it sounds like the existing statute that you propose to eliminate actually has a lot of valuable things in it. It also says under C of that statute, solicit public input regarding the proposed weather modification program or experimentation. So I don't understand why you want to eliminate this statute and you think that this statute is preferable. Is it because it's a prohibition?
Actually, pretty much everything that's in that statute is in my amendment because there's no consent in here. It's basically, and by the way, it's never happened. So if there has been any sort of experimentation that's happened, most people aren't even familiar with this statute. I have talked to my executive counselor, actually, and another executive counselor. They weren't even familiar with this at all. It was kind of just done and placed. And only Representative Aaron felt that she's the one that added those other notifications in there. They didn't have anything in there before, and that was in 2021. The piece that's missing is consent. And so any department or agency of the state may, with approval of the governor and council and within the limits of funds, blah, 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 basically says that you can do it. And that's where the prohibition is coming in because of that. So if there is a need for cloud seeding in the case of, and that's really the only piece of weather modification that would be something that is known. It's a known entity. It's been going on for decades, and then it's included in here. So yeah, we never consented to be guinea pigs for any sort of weather modification. That's why this needs to be removed. And all of those same things are in my bill.
Further questions? Representative Cloget.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again. The question, banning experimentation, cloud seeding, any dispersion over New Hampshire, if it needs to be done, is not, in, I don't want to use opinion, is the other New England states' environment the same as New Hampshire, that they can do it there? It's not like they're stopping their experimentation, just not over New Hampshire.
Yeah, not every state, and I can, if the committee wants to have that, not every state has, we're the unlucky state that has a weather modification experimentation statute. I don't believe that Vermont does, but it really doesn't matter. Like I said, Tennessee passed it for Tennessee. Florida's about to pass it for Florida. If, Vermont wants to perform weather modification experiments or cloud seeding, or Maine or Massachusetts, they're welcome to do it. So this is basically just saying, leave New Hampshire be, and there's not any all of the chemicals that are in every bit of these the disbursements. They're not all by plane. They are by drone. They are by balloons. They also are by ships that eject them in there. And I mean, I don't, there's people that are on this committee that should remember. I mean, I sent you every bit of information. It's been going on for a very, very long time. There's lots of concerns internationally. Mexico actually banned this specifically because they were letting off balloons to block the sun. And so this isn't, this isn't some made up thing. It's been going on for a long time. In the 1930s, they used it in the military to create, because they knew they could do that in wartime situations. And so we've had the technology for a long time. I don't know if you guys are familiar with chaff. You can actually see chaff on, meteorologists know this, but definitely out on the coast. So it's very familiar in California, for example, where it looks very different. So if you're looking on a weather report and you can see the color, they know, because it's got heavy metals in it, which is put on there. That's chaff is a military term. I put that in my documentation. So there's a lot of stuff that's not good. It's not good for the soil. It's not good for people. It's not good for respiratory things. It's not good for our environment. I'm on environment and agriculture. I wish this bill came to our committee because I think people are more aware of it there. I've been receiving messages from people all over the country. I have talked to reps in South Carolina, North Carolina, New York. All of these reps are putting in similar legislation. And like I said, the federal government right now is looking at this because they've really not paid attention to this, and there's a lot of people making a lot of money on just trying to either, whether it be block the sun or create certain weather episodes, because everything goes into when we try to play God, everything goes into a certain thing. When you affect one thing, there's an effect, a trickle down effect or a trickle down effect for everything else. And that's why I believe that this is the way to do it. It won't be a cost to anyone in the state. And since, supposedly they haven't been doing weather modification experimentation because we haven't heard of it in regards with that, there should be no problem in passing this prohibition on it, especially since we know it's going to be coming from up top very soon in the next couple months.
Okay, further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative, for introducing this legislation. Let's hear next from New Hampshire DES. I'll call on Mike Fitzgerald. Good afternoon, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Members of the committee, Michael Fitzgerald, Assistant Director of the Air Resources Division, Department of Environmental Services. I want to thank Representative Potenza for reaching out to us this afternoon and providing us with a copy of the amendment. So I will address most of my remarks to the potential amendment, assuming that that's something that the committee is going to consider. We did provide a fiscal note on the original bill, and as Representative Potenza indicated, it would have required significant resources. So I have only had the amendment for an hour, and I've had 2 other hearings that I've been in, so I'm just beginning to absorb it. But It does seem, as Representative Potenza stated, to eliminate a significant amount of the effort and resources that would have been required of the department in the original bill. I do note that as was noted previously, page 2, line 12 does say the state shall conduct a thorough environmental review. I'm not sure who the state is, who would be responsible, but I assume that would be something that under this situation of emergency for allowing cloud seeding, that the governor would make some sort of designation. And I don't know what kind of resources would be necessary to do that, but it's not directed at our department specifically. So I'm just noting that. Section 3, again, I think it's rather unlikely. We don't see a lot of cloud seeding, to the best of my knowledge. Here, I'm not addressing the other aspects that Representative Potenza's bill and the amendment we're addressing, but cloud seeding for weather modification, and specifically to address drought, we're not aware of. New Hampshire has been in serious drought conditions over the past several years, a number of times. There are specific requirements. I think it's in RSA 485, but I'm not the drought expert. That's our water division. I'm with the air division. There are some specific requirements for the governor in addressing drought emergencies and so on. So that should probably be looked at as well. As far as the notice of prohibition, I don't see, again, Representative Potenza stated correctly, that it does not seem particularly burdensome or onerous to us. It's just a matter of drafting a letter and sending it out to the agencies required here. So I would note that this is an issue that is of concern to many citizens. We do get a lot of complaints. We do get a lot of calls and concerns. And again, the department has no particular authority to address these types of emissions right now. But again, and this bill would not put that authority upon us. The amendment, as I understand it, would no longer put that upon us. So I think that's basically all of my comments. I'd be happy to address any questions if there are any. And I also have Dave Healy with us, who's our chief scientist and meteorologist. Again, we don't have a lot of familiarity with this type of work, but Dave is here, and if there are questions, I might ask him to come up and help us. I'm sorry.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Fitzgerald? Vice Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. More curious, and since you do have air in your name, I'll ask you this question. Do you know what the maximum altitude would be for cloud seeding to be effective at all? And would that still be within the New Hampshire airspace?
Well, if you're referring to air in my name as Airhead, maybe, and then, but no, I don't have any particular familiarity with cloud seeding procedures or information. Again, RSA 12F is not specific to our department currently, so we could certainly try to find some information and get back to you on it, but I don't have anything right now.
Representative Harrington has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I guess you had mentioned that you got a number of complaints and phone calls on this. I was wondering, how would you deal with a law like this that says all this stuff is prohibited, and then they're going to say, okay, what are you going to do about it, Mr. Air Director? And you're going to say, we're going to do absolutely nothing because we have no authority to do anything. Is that, it just seems to set you up for the fall guy.
It is a little difficult, but our response in these situations is generally the RSAs that we enforce and carry out. We do them with the authority that's provided to us by the legislature. So if the legislature chose to approve an RSA that had a prohibition on something, but no violation or whatever, that would be our answer, is Yes, it is prohibited. No, we have no authority to address it.
Further questions? Seeing none, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'll call up, did you have one, Representative?
I was
McGee?
just wondering if we could ask any questions of the meteorologist, since he has expertise in the cloud realm, whereas Mr. Fitzgerald is not an expert.
That be
in-
permitted, Mr. Fitzgerald?
Dave, you want to join us?
He brought him along, you know?
Misery loves company. So I don't know, is this to address the question about cloud seeding and heights and so on?
Yes, I think that the atmospheric stuff that's not your specialty.
I would say, and I'll defer to Dave after, but I would say that obviously activities that occur at significant height, 20, 30,000 feet, they could occur in Ohio, and those emissions, we regularly deal with what's known as air transport of pollutants from the Midwest, and so that's why we have a monitoring station on top of Mount Washington and a monitoring station at the top of Packman-Adnock to measure those high-level emissions. But again, Dave, I don't know if you have any familiarity with cloud seeding or anything to add to that.
Yeah, in the research that I did to prepare for this hearing, and this is very limited research, I should say, but I think I saw altitudes of 12,000 to 13,000 feet for cloud seeding to be effective. But again, that's just brief research that I did to try to get ready for this meeting. But yeah, Mike is correct. To build on his point, smokestacks from power plants in the Ohio River Valley that are, 1,000 or 2,000 feet tall, they release pollutants that can be transported to our part of the country, by prevailing wind currents.
Follow up?
I guess the question I would have is then, who is responsible for that level of the atmosphere if we actually have people that are in charge of various pieces? Because it seems like that it's the authority that I'm wondering about. Just you can't prohibit something, like you say, if a smokestack in Ohio is creating what's happening in that band of the atmosphere, whose jurisdiction is it?
Well, those types of sources, they're regulated by the Clean Air Act. And then the states also, under the umbrella of the Clean Air Act, enforce their own rules. But it's a state federal partnership, how we regulate those types of emission sources.
Yeah, I would just add we regularly meet with EPA and with other states. We've had a number of efforts, as I mentioned, the ozone transport region and various other Clean Air Act requirements. But we certainly can't tell Ohio what to do, but the EPA can tell them, and the Clean Air Act does have provisions that require states to address interstate transport of pollutants. And so we work very carefully with the EPA region and with the EPA on a national basis in how to address emissions coming into our state from other locations.
Okay, further questions? Representative La Rochelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, under what conditions do you need to have for cloud seeding to work? And in a drought, will we frequently have the conditions that would allow cloud seeding to work?
Yeah, again, cloud seeding is not just, it's not in the Air Resources Division's field of expertise. I know those activities go on, and there's nothing new about cloud seeding, and it does go on in other parts of the world, and I think states out west. But to my knowledge, in the research I've done, it's not something that happens frequently in this part of the country. So I just don't really have a good answer for that question.
Probably all our knowledge is based on cloudseeding.com. So we really don't have a lot of expertise in that arena.
Follow up, please.
Follow up.
I sort of tried to lead you into the situation where cloud seeding is only going to work when you have supersaturated conditions in the atmosphere. If the air is not supersaturated, you can seed all you want and there will be no rain. So that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Do we have typically those conditions of saturation or supersaturation in our air?
I think under drought conditions, we probably,
We don't know.
yeah, we just don't have the expertise on cloud seeding to be able to give you a good answer.
We'd be happy to take a look at that and get back to you on something if we can.
So I have a question. If you look at the last line of page 1,
Are
line
you looking at the
32.
amendment or?
Yes, the amendment.
Okay. Last line, page 1, yes.
It says that no person shall engage in activities involving the intentional release of polluting emissions. Would that prevent, for example, crop dusting?
I believe there are specific crop dusting. I believe the Department of Agriculture has regulations regarding that. We would not regulate crop dusting unless there was a toxic emissions that met the requirements of our statute, the Toxics Control Act. So I know we've been in touch. We've had complaints about pesticide spraying applications on apple trees in large orchards and so on, and those drifting into other areas. And we've traditionally worked with the Department of Agriculture on those to address them under their purview.
Thank you.
Yes.
Further questions? Vice Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to piggyback off that last question for my clarification. I know it's not your field, but then am I to assume that if crop dusting is taking place, I assume whatever is used in the chemicals for crop dusting is allowed under the EPA Air Act, I would think. And if that's true, then they would not be considered pollutants and would not come under this bill if it was passed?
I would certainly tend to agree with that. That if EPA had approved them as under the Pesticide Control Act, and then it's probably an activity that is would not be regulated by us under the Clean Air Act. But New Hampshire does have its own Toxic Control Act that is a separate requirement. So it's possible that something could be approved by EPA, but it's subject to our Toxic Control Act. Again, this is a gray area because our act is generally aimed at stationary sources, power plants, and chemical manufacturing facilities, that sort of thing. We don't have a lot of authority, to the best of my knowledge, to regulate emissions from aircraft or, pesticide spraying, that sort of thing. We'd have to work closely with the Department of Agriculture to ensure that there was, joint control, appropriate joint control.
Okay, additional questions? Seeing none, I'll thank you
Thank you very much.
and invite Stephen Clough to come talk to us. He's from Bedford. Welcome back, Mr. Clough. press the red button, please. Thank you.
Good to see you all again. I passed out my resume again, so you know my credentials and the audience knows them. My credentials as a toxicologist. I'm currently retired from a long career as a risk assessor evaluating impacts to human and ecological health. My job was essentially to determine the relative risks of industrial emissions on human health and wildlife. And I have sampled and evaluated all types of environmental media, and I worked in many states and with many types of state and federal regulatory agencies. I'm here to strongly support HB 764. I was made aware of this issue when I retired in 2019. About 4 out of 7 days every week, I look up to see plumes of micro and nanoparticulates streaking across the sky behind all different types of high-altitude aircraft. These plumes start out looking quite sharp and defined like contrails, but then they persist, gradually diffusing out horizontally across the sky as they hygroscopically absorb more and more water vapor, which is what cloud seeding normally does. By the end of the day, just like clockwork, the sun is blotted out by a thick haze. More often than not, the end result will be an entirely overcast sky, or worse, it will rain the following day. Now, some of you may be skeptical about this, but I would encourage you to not only look up, but to look up throughout the day and watch the progression of these plumes. How do we know these are not contrails? First, you will see many of these plumes stop and start, kind of like Morse code. You will not see this staggered pattern if it was normal jet exhaust. Second, I have videotaped aircraft at similar altitudes, one with a normal contrail, which disappears as fast as it is formed, but another alongside it with a persistent geoengineered plume, which then evolves into a thick lateral cloud. Third, I can show you many photographs in which these plumes will rain down visible trails of particulates, a phenomenon which I call feathering. Fourth, there are thousands of photos and videos all over the internet which shows skies as a virtual checkerboard of persistent aircraft plumes. Even if you don't believe this is a true phenomenon, should normal air traffic result in 90% of our incident sunlight to be blocked out for the majority of each day. I'm 71 years old, and I can tell you with 100% confidence that normal air traffic never ended up destroying a sunny day on so many occasions. Some of you might remember deep blue skies as well as bright cottony white cumulus clouds, which are not seen anymore. Since I have retired, I have sunk over $5,000 into buying an advanced dark field microscope. I have spent $2,000 to become certified as a certified live blood analyst, and I'm about to purchase a very expensive ICP mass spectrometer, which can measure very minute concentrations of metals and water. Now, why would I do this? Because since retirement, I have been beyond shocked to find out that the toxic metals and chemicals we are seeing rain down from the sky, which have never been seen in precipitation throughout my long career, aluminum, barium, strontium, those type of metals, are also showing up in our blood. In fact, it's even worse than that. It is truly Orwellian to say this, but we are also starting to see what are known as self-assembling nanotechnology, not only in human blood, but this technology is also seen in the blood of wildlife: squirrels, rabbits, deer, dogs, cats, you name it. Our surface water, soil, and most foods also contain these visible structures. Now, being an expert in sampling and analysis, I can tell you with certainty that the level of contamination in a human or an animal is always directly proportional to the proximity to that source. Consequently, since almost all environmental media are contaminated, the only possible source for this contamination is from geoengineering activities, which has been going on since the 1960s, probably earlier than that. In fact, there are many scientific papers that show direct correlations between the adulteration of the atmosphere and contamination in humans and wildlife. And that is my testimony for today. I appreciate you listening and your time, and I just encourage you all to look up more often and more frequently. And I'll take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Clough? Representative Kaplan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Clough, for coming in. I am curious about your data on what you call the self-replicating nanotechnology or something, nanotechnology. Where can we see that, or where is that?
I would direct you to, so I'm a member of Dr. David Nixon's Micronauts group, which is an international microscopy group. I would direct you to Dr. David Nixon's website. Dr. Anna Milhal-Shia is on her Substack is doing tremendous work, just mind-boggling work, showing these self-assembling particles. There are a bunch of other Substacks. You could go to geoengineeringwatchdog.org. I'm not sure they would have that, but, and, you know, if you wanted to talk offline, I'd be happy to. You could come down to my house. I could sit you down for a blood sampling analysis and maybe even show them to you in your own blood. I'll give you the blood sampling analysis for free.
Thank you.
Further questions for Dr. Clough? Well, I guess there's no more. Thank you,
you.
sir, for giving us your perspective. Next up is Melissa White of Peterborough.
She just put money in the meter, so if you could go to the next one.
Oh, okay. Next up is Rick Fabrizio of the Business and Industry Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Vose, Vice Chair Thomas, and committee members. For the record, I'm Rick Fabrizio, Senior Director of Advocacy and Public Affairs for the Business and Industry Association, New Hampshire Statewide Chamber of Commerce. Just learned of the amendment earlier this afternoon. We were opposed to the original version because of the inclusion of electromagnetic radio frequency and microwave radiation. With the removal of that, we would go to a neutral position, but I thought it was important to state that as fact in case in any part of the process a move was made to restore references to the electromagnetic radio frequency and microwave radiation. I'm happy to take or try to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Mr. Fabrizio? Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fabrizio, for being here. You submitted testimony, which I glanced over briefly, so I understand that your exceptions were based on, is it cellular use of, that there might be
Yes.
some overlap with existing technologies that.
The electromagnetic radio frequency is primarily used for wireless telecommunications, which actually includes, in certain cases, television, radio, wireless cell service, as well as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and satellite communications.
Additional questions, Representative Mattson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vice Chair. Sorry. You said that you know a little bit about the cloud seeding. Can you tell me what altitude they usually?
I certainly did not.
Oh, sorry. So I was just wondering, do you have any idea what altitude they usually do this cloud seeding?
In hearing the
ice?
references, someone said 12 to 13,000 feet, while someone else had mentioned perhaps as high as 35,000 feet, and had made that point that at that height you start to, you know, if you did it here at 30,000 feet, it might be off the coast. But no, I just had really looked up that weather modification does not use radio frequencies and certainly not in any direct application of it.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Fabrizio.
Thank you.
Next up would be, next up is Melissa White from Peterborough.
Hi there. Thank you for having us today. My name is Melissa White. I live in Peterborough. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss HB 764 with you. Excuse me for being out of breath. I just had to feed my meter. And thank you, Representative Potenza, for this great bill. So a couple things. I know that you already read the statutory or the legalese of the weather modification experimentation bill or law 12-F1. But it says any department or agency of the state may, with the approval of the governor and council, and within the limits of appropriated funds or by means of gifts, donations, or grants, engage in and within the limits of appropriated, oh, wait, sorry, I read that part, undertake experimentation in the techniques and methods for weather modification, and may cooperate therein in the federal government with authorized agencies of other states and with interested persons and organizations. So basically it's saying that any interested party can undertake an experimentation in the techniques and methods for weather modification. So even if you think it's not happening now, you can see, again, from the documents, the federal documents that you have been given by Representative Potenza, or she will give you if you haven't received them already, that it will happen in the future because state law allows it. And because of that, state law 12-F1 must be repealed in its entirety. The last line of the law, the full law, says that the state will solicit public input regarding the proposed weather modification program or experimentation, but soliciting public input is not the same as consent. I host a social media group with almost 2,000 members here in New Hampshire. Not everyone's from New Hampshire, let's say 1,500 are, but not that many people could come today because we work and we received very short notice of this hearing. So I just want you to know that none of us consent to being experimented on. And that is the goal of 764. And I also wanted to just point out that a lot of the questions seem to be getting way off, way away from the topic or of the actual bill. So the goal of the bill is to repeal 12-F1, and that's pretty much it. And regarding the idea that, crop dusting could be considered intentional release of polluting emissions, it says specifically in those lines that it's in regards to geoengineering, that solar radiation modification involving the intentional release of polluting emissions. So that is all connected to geoengineering. It's not about crop dusting or, other activities. So again, I'm a little rushed, so I hope I made sense, and thank you all for your time.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you coming all the way from Peterborough. Questions for, yes, Representative McGee.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here and thank you for making the time. I just wanted to go back to 12F1 because I see where it says at the end of section 1 that there can be cooperation with the federal government, authorized agencies or other states, and with interested persons and organizations. But that's not who's allowed to do this. It's the beginning of the sentence says any department or agency of the state may, with the approval of the governor and council. So it isn't anybody that can do this. I mean, the language is very specific.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think the intent of the people who put this in place originally intended for it to be that anyone could do this without authority from the state, the governor, the council. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
There was no questions. You don't have to respond.
okay.
Any questions for Ms. White? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, I'll call on Sean Fife of Gilmanton. Good afternoon and welcome to ST&E.
Thank you for your time today. I kind of listening to everybody else, didn't write my own thing, picking up the slack. We have a ring developing around our equator because most of us believe the Earth is round, and that's the centrifugal force moving these micro nanoparticles to the center of our equator just with kinetic energy. So even though we don't see it linger here, it still hangs out there and it is blotting out the sun permanently with a ring like Saturn. So we're going to be accountable to other countries and nations And New Hampshire, going along with it, puts their neck out on that line saying, well, we agree with it because we're letting it happen here too. So we want to quickly remove ourselves from cooperating with any of this because it's a genocide if you didn't know. I know people keep saying things like beryllium salts, but you got to understand that is 10,000 times more toxic than lead, and you're breathing it. All right? Now, there's stuff in this, the nanoparticles actually cross your brain barrier. And other things that they're adding to these mixtures, not all of them, there's different sets of goop that they dump on us, but they are putting mNRA, messenger ribonucleic acid. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's a strand of DNA that they're using aids to connect to your body through gain of function so they can control and read your thoughts and bodies. And they say we won't ever need an election because they'll know what our answer is already through AI. And that is the interface that they are dumping in the clouds. So with that being said, I don't think I have to elaborate on how legal or unlegal it is. You're going along with genocide. They're poisoning our crops. The aluminum makes it so crops don't absorb water unless they have a patent on a specific type of seed in California. And if you buy their seed, your stuff will grow. Me as a farmer, I've already noticed the difference last year in the size of our crops. Their seed versus our heirloom, which has always worked in Gilmington. It's different now already. And I watch these planes leave from Portland and they drive straight down the Loudon Ridge, headed straight to Vermont. You watch them dump it out in the same flight pattern every time, and they are blasting it with radio waves because you can see the waves in the clouds as they light them up. The way this works is it heats up the nanoparticles, that like the aluminum that is in there. And that heat creates a thinner place in the atmosphere, and that stalls weather or makes it go around. They literally move rainstorms to or from places. You say it's dry out, it's because they made it dry. And it's not raining, it's not because there's no water up there, it's because they moved it around you. And HARP uses a barge that floats this gigantic trillion-watt laser out around, and they are off your coast, and they shoot it from anywhere on Earth they want to float these things. It's not just the infrastructure that's in Alaska, it's not just the one that's down in Puerto Rico, it's not just the one up in Norway, it's not the one in Germany. We have them floating around the world, blasting our atmosphere. I ran for governor last year. And I came in third in the Republican primary, and this is one of the legs of the stool I went on. This, getting rid of voting machines, and stop poisoning us involuntarily with these mandated vaccines that are poison, folks. And this stuff in the air is the same stuff that's in the vaccine in some of these blends. So you are not doing it willingly, but by not making laws against it, you're complicit. So thank you for your time. If anybody has a question, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Fife?
Anybody? All right. Thank you very much
Seeing
for
none.
hearing my reality.
Thank you. Next up is Bob McClory, who is from Grout Hill or Grant Hill.
How are you doing?
We're good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, representatives. I got a couple of things to add as well. HB 1700, when Jason put that through last year, I believe, maybe you guys don't really know, but it went viral across social media, across the country. People were making videos about it, and they were super excited for it to be going through, and everybody was looking towards New Hampshire as, you know, you guys are doing that. Ooh, I like it, you know. And it felt good to see that in New Hampshire and all these people making the videos. But jumping on top of that, it's going to be a big deal when it comes down to all this, because what Kelly was talking about earlier, obviously we're going through a lot of executive orders, and they're going ping, 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 and nobody knows what's going to happen. And they're like the most wackiest things, you know, like getting rid of paper straws. Who knew that was going to be an executive order? But it was. And I'm going to tell you right now, we are in a big clock. Earth is a part of it. The sun is the center of it. And there's planets flying all over. And if you guys paid attention a little bit, you notice that there was a bunch of planets that lined up over the last, actually they're still lined up. And these planets are all made out of different materials and they all vibe at different vibes, metals, gases, rocks. We're in a big cosmic clock, and we're supposed to be vibing with these big celestial planets. But how would you stop that? Maybe spray the skies with different metals and hit them with frequencies like 5G. Might sound a little wacky, but when you get down to it, you realize that everything's vibrational. On top of this, I just want to say I'm sick of these hazy sunsets in the summertime. I lay out in the sun by the water quite a bit, and I pay attention to the sun, and I pay attention to all the clouds, and I'm sick of it. I know everybody's sick of it, and it's not like you guys can stop them from doing it, and probably are like, what is that even talking about? But you know what? Really, it's like a big collective, and like Kelly was talking about, the executive orders are going to start coming through. Who knows if there's going to be one for that? But like I said, I always lay out in the sun all the time. And I noticed during the Trump presidency that there was less chemtrails during that time than there is during the Biden one. One more. Nope, that's it. Oh, wait, one more. We've been finding that in Alzheimer's patients, there's massive amounts of aluminum deposits in these brains, and it's messing with the neurons. And if they're spraying aluminum down and everybody's breathing it in, it's like the best way to intake it, besides cooking with it, maybe. Any questions?
Questions? Apparently not.
That's
Thank
all right.
you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we'll call on Representative Jonah Wheeler. Welcome, Representative, to STNE.
Thank you, Chairman Vos, members and friends of the Science Tech House at Science and Technology Committee. I don't often come here because I don't have a PhD, so I just try to leave this to you guys. Now, people, when they first hear about this, they say, oh my God, what a conspiracy theory. What a crazy, crackpot, ridiculous conversation. I don't even know why I'm here. But then you actually take the time to do the research, not on Infowars.com, but just on the government websites and what information is available to the public right now. And it's clear that our skies are being poisoned. And I'm here not as somebody who knows why or knows what's going on, but somebody just to say we should address this. The state should actually take the time to address this. If it is going on, I'm positive it's illegal because nobody voted on it. And I think that RSA 12K should be repealed. I think that 12F, thank you, so many numbers, 12F should be repealed. And I think that we should clean up our skies so that they can be blue skies again. You know, there's a lot of pollution going on in this world. And I think that if we were to move forward with cloud seeding or any of the other programs or projects that people who have a lot of wealth and a lot of money would like to move forward on, then we leave ourselves in a dangerous position. So I would urge the members of the Science Technology Committee to look into this and to continue to do what they can to potentially repeal 12F and to address some of these other concerns in here. And I would also say to look into the concerns around radiation from the Wi-Fi bands and 5G technologies. Everyone says, oh, that's a crackpot's conspiracy theory. But again, you look into it, the Wi-Fi radiation bands, they do have an effect on people. And the more that we're allowing these Wi-Fi bands to go unregulated, unaffected by the government, the more we're putting our people at harm. I'm here because I have a military family. I grew up under the strong character of somebody who I won't say his name because he'd be upset if I did in a public space, but he was special ops, and he is. That's all I'll say. That's all I can say, I suppose. But let me just say, this is something that should be looked into much more. And you don't need a 21-year-old or crazy conspiracy theorists to tell you that. You can look into a number of the other public, well-documented official records that exist of this going on. This has been something that has been posited since the early 1930s, and it's a practice that has been employed since that time. So I thank the committee for the time. I have to get back to committee. As Kelly knows, where's Kelly? But I thank the committee for its time, and I hope that we'll be able to find something out on this level. Thank you.
We always enjoy an opportunity to spend some time with you, Jonah. So thank you for coming. All right, he's got to get back to committee, so we'll move on. And I'm going to call up another speaker, but I'm going to apologize ahead of time for not being able to totally decipher the name. I think it's Ro Ivarni. Does that sound like somebody who's here?
Risa? Starts with R.
Starts with an R. First name is R, last name is E, or maybe F.
And you filled out a pink card, so that should narrow it down.
Is it Rosa? Is it a Rosa?
Could it be Risa?
Risa?
No.
Risa. Risa.
Just for the record, could you could you spell out your name for me so I can press the button, please? Thank you.
Risa, R-I-S-A, Evans, E-V-A-N-S.
Oh, Risa Evans, okay.
So thank you to the committee for considering this issue, which I do think is one of the most important issues of our time, and to Representative Potenza for coming back with a wonderful bill this year. I wasn't planning to testify, but the discussion about RSA 12F just made me want to say a couple of things about that. So 12F1. So I think one of the things that's really important in this statute that allows weather modification is that there is absolutely no requirement of any risk-benefit analysis. There's no requirement that there be any benefits at all, indeed, let alone a requirement that the benefits outweigh the risks. And so, RSA 12F1 really leaves us as sitting ducks in New Hampshire. So that's just, I think the absence of any cost-benefit, requirement of a cost-benefit analysis or benefit is just reason alone to repeal that statute. In the section of the amended HB 764 that does allow cloud seeding in the cases of an emergency, a drought, there's a requirement that the state make a finding, that there will not be harm to, they have to assess the potential risks and benefits and ensure that the activities will not result in harm to the environment. So there's a clear improvement in terms of the activities that are allowed in the, in the proposed bill. So I just wanted to talk, because I think there was some discussion before about, what are the differences? And I think, the other difference, of course, is that the existing statute allows us to be experimented on without any consent, and the activities that are allowed in the proposed bill are just in case of emergency when there's a finding that those activities will benefit the people of New Hampshire and also not harm the environment. So then stepping aside from the statutes, I just want to follow up on what several people have testified to about the importance of looking up at our skies, really with an open mind, with curiosity, and with honesty. I have been watching the skies with dismay for over 10 years, really not wanting to believe what I have seen. I can remember, and some of you on this committee are old enough to remember this too, lying on my back on the beach, looking up into a deep blue sky and seeing those billowy cumulus clouds that are so beautifully defined. They're just like these things you unbelievably beautiful and specific and clear. So you look up at the sky now and try to remember the last time that there was a crystal clear blue day with a few really well-defined clouds that behaved the way clouds behave, the way they're supposed to behave. You have to look up. And another sign that you're seeing a geoengineered sky is that the clouds don't behave the way that real clouds behave. Real clouds are orderly, they float on air currents, they just have an order in them, which is why so many artists have painted them. But if you look at the skies now, they're what I call chimeras. They're just clouds going in every direction because they weren't put there by nature. They're not natural. So it really is happening, as hard as it is to accept. So you have an opportunity to do something about this, and I really urge you to take it up because this is really, a historic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Risa? Seeing none, thank you. Last word on this legislation goes to Jason Gerhard, who I believe was the author of the bill that we heard last year. So welcome back, the Honorable Jason Gerhard.
Thank you, but I wish there was a policy you could choose if you have the honorable title or not. I just find that kind of weird, nobility kind of thing. But I appreciate that. No offense to you. Jason Gerhard out of Northfield. And I just wanted to come in today. I left work, that's why I'm kind of dressed as I am. But I work outside, so I built houses up on Squam Lake in Winnipesaukee, and it's very beautiful up there. I think it's nice being up in the mountains. And I'm outside all day long. I mean, that's what I'm on a roof or doing whatever. So I don't want to say that my personal experience is greater than your expertise. Everybody in this room is definitely smarter than I am. But at the same time, when you see these condensation trails coming out of these airplanes that behave differently, as the much better verse speaker before me mentioned, you're required to believe essentially the government bureaucrats, and as we found out through recent releases through the whole Doge thing, paid, media sources on the narrative that we're currently experiencing. And I just find that highly problematic in the fact that we have these committees set up through the State House. And as a state representative, you are the oversight for the rest of the government, but also you're a check on the federal government. We're not just supposed to be, formally, but it's not just a rubber stamp kind of a gig. This is actually a pretty serious endeavor. And I just think when you have this many people who are willing to take off their time from work, living, so forth, and I understand you guys are here, but that's a different story. You get $100. But we need to really take it seriously and wonder what's going on. And is it worth my time to, and as I can say, at least for myself and many people here, if any one of you on the committee said, I want some evidence on this, this, and this, or I want you to show me, people would bend over backwards. We got a guy willing to give out blood samples, which sounded a little crazy, but I mean, it's really, it's really indicative of the way that New Hampshire is, where people care about each other, and I think that's what this comes down to. We had the government just sidetrack, but I'm coming back. We had the government tell us that fluoride was the best thing ever. Now we know it's basically retarding children's educational opportunities. I mean, that's a serious thing. And it took a long time. And I know multiple bills came through and got shot down in that period of time. Not blaming you guys, but just saying that I just worry where we're on this whole, well, we'll wait till we know for sure that this is going on. I mean, we have Operation Large Area Coverage. In 1957-58 by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps, they involved spraying large areas, this is from Wikipedia, zinc cadmium sulfide over cities, including St. Louis got hit really bad. And there's it came out in the news around a decade ago. They were looking into it again, and they're saying if it's radioactive as well. But the point being is we have a government that will experiment on us. It's basically a fact at this point. So I believe that you, as another element of government, but closer to me, should investigate this seriously, reach out to people who are much smarter than I am, and maybe even smarter than the people in this room, and find out what's going on, because we're suffering here. We're suffering here, and I think people are actually literally dying from storms that are being manipulated. We could talk about Project Cirrus back in the 50s, where they seeded a hurricane off the coast of North Carolina. Well, it was in North Carolina. Anyway, it made a hook back into mainland, caused a bunch of damage and death. Army denied it for a long time, finally admitted it. And, Yeah, we're getting into a weird place. I just wanted 2 quotes I'll read, and then I'll leave you guys alone. This is from President John F. Kennedy addressing the United Nations in 1961. We shall propose further cooperative efforts between all nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control. 1961. They just haven't been sitting around. As you see, we waste billions of dollars on crazy things. So, second quote is, it lays the predicate and foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather. And he who controls the weather will control the world. That was Lyndon Baines Johnson at Southwest Texas State University in 1962. And if you guys get a chance, that video clip is really crazy, the way he has this really kind of Dr. Evil thing going on. It's really creepy. So anyway, I want to thank you for your time. And I really would encourage anybody, if you want to reach out to anybody here, I know most of the people here, you can contact me or them directly. And let's just look into this seriously. Tennessee made a step in the right direction. And I disagree with Kelly on this. I think there should be a penalty provision, even if it's $1. And I kind of get the concept. If you put a penalty provision in and you establish liability, the lawsuits will start flooding in. But that's the point. Courts are how we're supposed to handle our problems, not through mobs in the street and so forth. We should litigate these things, take experts from both sides and figure out what's going on. And I think that's what this really comes down to in a lot of ways, is nobody wants to be caught liable for the harm. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for calling you honorable, but
I appreciate that.
I didn't intend to insult you by doing that. So no questions, I guess, for Mr. Gerhard. Well, that being the last pink card that I have, I think this public hearing is now complete. So I will.
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Yes, Representative Potenza will allow you to come back and
Just real quick.
be real quick. Thank you.
Okay. So I just wanted to follow up on the speaker that came in from the Business Association. So in the original bill of 764, before I pulled out, they used the HB 1700 from last session. They used that in the description. So even in the original bill of 764, it didn't have anything about microwave radiation or any of that. So and she realized that she screwed up, but she said, okay, well, you're most likely going to do an amendment. So I never changed the description. And of course, everything came, as we all know, when we were bill filing. So in the previous version, it never talks about, electromagnetic radio frequency or microwave radiation in the original bill either. So that was a mistake from OLS. They just pulled the exact same description from HB 1700. I just wanted the committee to know that, and I'm glad the speaker said we're all good with the bill, or no position. So that's really good. I just wanted to make that a note. So
you're saying that the title of the bill.
The title of the bill in the amendment is now fixed, but before, when it came out, that's the exact same. She didn't grab my title. She put everything else in, but she pulled the title from the bill from HB 1700. So that's why, of course, that other speaker, when they were going to oppose it, was concerned, because it was just in the title, but there wasn't anything in the bill that talked about it anyway.
So the scheduling notice that we had for today's public hearings had 2 titles that were incorrect due to something that OLS did.
Correct.
Wow.
Oh,
okay.
great.
Good. Thank you. All right. With that, we'll close the public hearing on House Bill 764 FN, and that will conclude, unless there are activities the committee would like to conduct,